Hello and welcome back to my studio. It's Lois here from Lois and Morgana Davidson Art, and to make a change, it's evening. It's quite late. I've got a nice glass of wine and I was in the mood to go into the studio and just paint a beautiful loose landscape. My mind's been racing recently and I just needed to sort of quieten things down, and painting gets me into the zone. It's my happy place, and so I hope you'll enjoy this kind of calm and tranquil landscape painting, a beautiful winter river scene that I'm trying to paint as loosely as I can. I'm starting off by sketching out just a sort of bare outline of the hills in the distance, the position of a river winding towards us at the front, and just going to position a few lines for my trees. I'm using an HB pencil and being careful not to indent the page. I'm just keeping my lines very rough and loose and sketchy. I'm trying out my daylight lamps because it's pitch black outside, and so I'm hoping that the light is going to be quite good in the studio with these daylight art lamps. My paper today is Milford cold press watercolor paper, 140 pounds weight. It's taped to my board with ordinary decorator's masking tape, and I'm going to start this painting wet in wet. My board's at an angle of about 20 to 30 degrees, so gravity will help with the painting. And I'm using my large wash brush. I've wet the sky all over, and now I'm pulling some cobalt blue through across the damp page to build up some sort of impressions of just very light mare's tail clouds across the sky, and then bringing some of that colour down across the landscape into the water so I get that reflected in the river. It's really important for me to keep this nice and loose, so I'm painting the impression of things rather than the things themselves. So I've dipped my brush into sepia and indigo, and I am creating the impression of some distant trees. I'm taking my flat brush, which is clean and damp, and I just run that along to clean up underneath that tree line, and now working in some raw umber, bringing that colour forward to create the impression of the riverbanks. This brush is a Princeton Aqua Elite Mottler brush. It's a synthetic version of a sable brush. There's a bit of spring to the hairs, but it's not too soft. So it's not like a squirrel mottler, which is much softer. This has got a sort of bit of stiffness to it, and it's a really nice brush for loose landscape painting. So as I build up the impression of the land, you can see that I'm mostly working with horizontal brushstrokes and painting just big, bold sweeps of colour and little dabs of colour rather than painting things themselves. But now when I use my palette knife to scrape through the damp paint to start off my trees, I'm hoping you can see that these marks that I've been making are beginning to come together as the washes sort of marry and mingle and the colours all blend on the page using the wet in wet method. So these are some closer foreground trees, slightly scrubbier than the ones further back on the left. Again, dragging the point of my palette knife through the damp paint, revealing the white of the paper below. So I suppose I'm drawing with the palette knife, if you like. And then once those marks are established into the damp paint, when it's fully dry, then I can add some painted marks to those as well. I'm just wiping any moisture off from the tape so that it doesn't find its way back into the painting and maybe cause some runbacks. And then I'm just going to deepen the tone here and there, just dabbing the paint on where I think it needs to be a little bit darker on the riverbanks and beneath the trees. And then I'll take a little bit of a break and have a look at the painting and see if I think it needs any more work. And I might as well have a little sip of my lovely glass of red wine, so cheers. What a perfect way to spend an evening. I now will leave it to dry completely. And here's the dry painting. I'm now going to use the wet on dry method. The wet and wet method that I used before gives me lots of beautiful softly diffused marks to a greater or lesser degree depending on how wet the paper is and how strongly I apply the mixtures of paint. But now that the painting's dry, I can get some really nice hard-edged details. When I apply the paint using the wet on dry method, it won't soften and diffuse, it will go and stay put. So I'm using it now to work around the marks that I scraped into the painting in the first stage with the palette knife. And I'm using my, I think it's a size 1 or a size 2 Pro Art synthetic rigger brush for this. Any lining brush is good for this, any brush that's got a good point that holds enough paint to make these nice long, slim, delicate brush strokes. Trying to keep them looking quite natural. I don't want them to look too manicured. Just trying to create the suggestion of these winter trees and bare branches. And then moving over to these smaller, scrubbier trees on the opposite bank. Working quickly, and the reason for that is to try to get these fresh-looking, spontaneous brush strokes. I can just see some damp paint, so I can drag a few marks through with the palette knife. It wasn't quite dry. And I think I'm quite happy with that. It's loose, there's not much detail, but I'm hoping that it gives or creates the impression of this misty winter riverside scene. So I'm removing the tape. This gives us the chance to see it with a clean white border, and so we can see how it looks almost with sort of fresh eyes. And I'm quite pleased with the way this has turned out. It's nice and loose, there's not too much detail, and I think it says more or less what I wanted it to say. It has that atmosphere, and I really enjoyed this evening painting with a glass of wine, which was very civilised. And I think it's a good test for my my daylight lamps, and I think they've given quite a nice lighting to this video. Well, let me know what you think in the comments below. So just before I go, there's just time for a quick plug for my book, Landscapes in Watercolor, Techniques and Tutorials for the Complete Beginner. There's all kinds of projects in there, lots of helpful information to get you started. So please follow the links below if you're interested in taking a look. Well, thank you so much for watching. Please leave us a like and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. And thank you so much to all our wonderful supporters on Patreon. Please follow the links below if you're interested in supporting us there. So that just leaves me to bid you good night and wish you very happy painting.